Welcome back to Power Play. You just heard from our front bench about their top picks for the story of the year, the political story of the year. Can pollsters quantify what they qualified? All right, let's bring in David Coletto. He's the founder and CEO of Abacus Data, and Sebastien Dallaire is an executive vice president at Leger for Eastern Canada. Hi to both of you. Holiday greetings, and thank you very much for making time for the conversation. I'll start off. We were just talking with our other panel about the biggest stories of the year. From a public opinion polling perspective, David, I'll start with you. What is the story of the year?
Well, I think Sebastien and I are going to agree. It was the massive swing in support to the Liberal Party, soon after the Liberal leadership race began, where I don't think I've seen, a 20-point swing in popular support for a government that, in a party we had all but written off just a few weeks earlier. So I think that's the biggest story, is how fast Canadians' views towards the Liberal Party and to their, comfort with re-electing that party after almost a decade in office.
You both have been doing this for a long time, Sebastien. Had you ever seen anything like it?
In Quebec, yes.
In Quebec, valid point.
Nationally, no, but it reminded me in many ways of what we saw in Quebec in 2011 when we had the Orange Crush, where Jack Layton and the NDP came out of nowhere to go from 1 seat in the province to 49. And the 1 seat was already their highest historical point. So that was jarring. And now it happened at the federal level where, as David said, we are all but written off the Liberals early last year. If we look in December, late last year, and then early January, it looked like the Liberals had absolutely no chance of winning. And all of a sudden, they were in the lead and came really close to winning a majority.
So that brings us to where things stand right now, because if there was a ton of movement from a year ago to the election, David, after the election until now, there has not been a commensurate amount of movement. What is your assessment of where things stand, primarily between, of course, the Liberals and the Conservatives?
Yeah, look, I look at depends the question, but first, if you ask people how they would vote, they're telling us they would vote largely like they did in the spring. The vast majority, 90+% of Liberals would vote Liberal again, and 90% plus of Conservatives would vote Conservative again. So it's still a very competitive political environment around the question of vote intention. It's different when you ask about the leaders. It's different when you ask about which party you think is best able to handle the issues you care most about. But on the core horse race ballot question, I still think this is a very competitive environment, like it had been in the lead up to that election.
And Sebastien, what are you seeing in the sort of horse race numbers right now?
Seeing the same thing. So the Liberals are ahead, but at the same time, we've seen some shifts regionally over time. Some of the underlying indicators have softened a little bit for Mark Carney and the Liberals, but we're not seeing a move towards the Conservative. And what we're seeing is in Quebec, the Bloc is a little bit stronger than they were if we look back at the election. So that could cost the Liberals a few seats here, while they became maybe a little bit stronger elsewhere in Canada. So probably not much change from a voting from the results if we were to have an election today.
The issue set, both when the Conservatives were ahead and then when the Liberals moved ahead, David, was very informative in determining kind of what people were thinking about as they were deciding how to cast their ballot. If you look at the kinds of issues that are top concerns for Canadians right now, what story does it tell you?
Well, it tells us the affordability crisis in people's minds remains front and center. 2 out of 3 told us in a poll we did a few weeks ago that they feel like it's never been as bad as it is now. And when you ask them to rate a bunch of issues and ask them which 3 are most important, close to 2 and 3 say the cost of living is one of those 3. The economy, healthcare, and housing. What we've seen is concerns around Trump and the U.S.-Canada relationship is still important, and important to some voters far more than others, but it's moved down that list. And so I think that's part of what's creating that competitive environment. Is there's a number of issues that the Conservatives typically do well on, and they are doing well on, that are more salient to voters today, or Canadians today, than others which the Liberals typically have done better in the last year on.
Sebastian, when we look at the question of leadership, that's another interesting public opinion story, right? Because while the horse race is very even, when you ask the question of, your approval or lack thereof of the people leading those parties, there's a big discrepancy in either direction for each of the parties. And in particular, that has, in recent weeks, drawn a lot of focus and scrutiny to the leadership of the Conservative Party. What are you seeing there?
Because of the key issues that we see have been dominating, voters' minds for now. Well, we could even say over 2 years. It's nothing new that affordability is so important. But of course, the arrival of Donald Trump, the threats to Canada, the tariffs, the economic uncertainty, all these things play into the hands of Mark Carney, which explains the rise of the Liberal Party and of Mark Carney as a leader. And what we're seeing is it's tough for Pierre Poilievre to really score a lot of points on anything that relates to the economy. The core strength of Pierre Poilievre when he was chosen as a leader is that he was so different from Justin Trudeau. And he presented himself very well to a lot of voters when he was focusing on affordability itself and pinning the problems on Justin Trudeau, but also focusing on other, what we can called culture war issues or cultural issues, also about the environment. And Mark Carney made a lot of this disappear. So a lot of the wedges that really gave Pierre Poilievre an edge are gone. And it's difficult when you've been in the public spotlight for so many years to completely reinvent yourself as an economic mastermind. And the trick for the Conservatives will be to try to separate affordability from other economic concerns. Because as long as it remains wrapped in a general discussion about the economy and about tariffs and how to manage the relationship with the U.S., it's going to be harder for Pierre Poilievre. If they bring this back to affordability, that's where they have a better chance of succeeding.
What does the party's chances look like without Poilievre? You've done some interesting analysis there, David.
Look, it's hard to predict that because so many of the people who might replace him are not well known. And so it's very hypothetical. But when you do test some of the names that people have said could replace him, none of them are as well liked within the party, which I think is the first important part of the dilemma facing the Conservatives. But some of them are more appealing to those outside of the party, right? And so it's a hard one to answer. I actually don't know if anyone could do as well as Pierre Poilievre in this environment. And there's two reasons. One is Mark Carney remains quite popular. And so whoever would go up against him still has to find a way to make the case that he is not the right person for this moment for the people who think he is. But the second factor is that Conservative coalition that Poilievre has built, part of it is there because of him. And a part of it would probably reject a more moderate Jean Charest, Erin O'Toole type person in this environment. And so I think it's like a really hard place for the Conservatives because Pierre Poilievre at once is deeply popular among most of those who would vote Conservative, but anything but with the rest of the country.
Sebastian, I just have a few seconds left, but I got to get your take on Quebec. If you don't mind, you had new numbers out December 3rd. They were already not pretty for the Liberals. What is your read on what's going on?
Well, I think what we see in many ways, politics can be cruel because what we're seeing in everything that transpired is that Pablo Rodriguez himself doesn't seem to be involved in any of what in Quebec, a new term that really became popular is fling flang. That's something we hear everywhere now. But the fact that all the ethical issues seem to be connected to his leadership campaign, whether he was involved or not, and the history of the Liberal Party in Quebec with some, while over the years we've heard a lot of allegations, not many proofs, but there's a trail that has been following the Liberals for a long time in the province. And unfortunately, Pablo Rodriguez got caught into this, and I don't think there was much of a choice for him to go at this stage. So we'll see what happens because in next year, we know it's going to be an election about the referendum. And this is an area where the Liberals can really present themselves as the alternative again, with the CAQ struggling and it is now difficult for the Premier in the polls. So everything is up in the air in Quebec. And as as usual, we'll probably have a surprise next year. In Quebec, that's the way politics goes.
It does. Okay, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much, both of you, for the conversation, for your insights tonight. Appreciate it, and the best of the holiday season to you as well.
Thank you.
Happy holidays.
Thank you and your viewers.